Hey guys, happy Monday. I just lost all my papers. It's windy here in Texas. I'm sitting outside to get good reception and gonna wait for some people to show up. And I have all my notes here. Hey guys, sorry I'm a little shaky. How are you guys this morning? Well, it may not be morning where you are. How are you this Monday? Love to see you guys here. Welcome to another Tech Tip Talk. I am waiting for Christina to join me. How are you guys doing with your designs, with your tech editing? Do you have any questions for us? Love to see you guys, and we really love helping you out here. I'm waiting for Christina. And there she is.
Hi guys. Hi everybody. Oh,
How are you, Christina?
I am okay. How are you?
I am hanging in there. It's a little sticky here. It is midsummer and it is hot.
We had some really nice weather for a while after we had a lot of heat, and it's like we had the windows open forever, and now it's getting hot again.
So, probably should introduce ourselves for those of you who are new here. My name is Sarah Walworth. I am a knitting tech editor,
I'm Christina McGrath. I am also a knitting tech editor.
and we love to jump on here on Mondays to talk to you live and answer your questions about tech editing, knitting pattern writing, and all the things that come up when technical wise related to designing knitwear.
There are a lot
So
of details.
there are a lot of details, and we kind of like to nerd out about the technical aspects of stuff. So today we decided we're going to talk about.
We want to talk about the components of a pattern, all the parts of a pattern, all the things that need to be included in a pattern, and what things really need to be included and what things you don't need to include unless you want to, and maybe some of the reasons um, why you would include things that maybe you wouldn't. Reasons why you might consider including things that you don't. So that's what we
So
were going to talk about.
the stuff that we want to include in a pattern is pretty basic in the sense of things that are absolutely required are
Right,
the things that your knitter needs in order to reproduce your design.
right.
But there's a lot of things that maybe you're like, well, should I include this or should I not include this? And my colleague here has written a blog post on it, which she said she just updated. Is that right?
Well, I did look at it this morning, and it actually doesn't go into as much detail as I thought it did.
Mm-hmm.
But it does go into more detail about the things that are not always included.
Right.
But even within the things that you really need to include, like tools that they need, yarn that they need, techniques that are used, and the instructions, there's ways to be more.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can give more information or you can give less. But you
Right.
do have to have those bare bones in there. And then there are all these other things that aren't really necessary, but that we're starting to find are in most patterns and that people like to have in there. And all of that ends up just being more information for the knitter that makes them even more successful.
Right.
A gauge for every different stitch pattern used in the design.
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
well, yes, but
Yes, but what's the but part?
so you do want to give, okay, so for a tech editor and for you designing the pattern, you need to know the gauge for every single stitch that's used in your pattern so you can figure out how to grade it and what the measurements are going to be. You have to know. But to put in your pattern multiple gauges can be really confusing for the knitter because what gauge do they try to get to base their pattern on? And it may not be likely that they're going to get every single exact gauge the same exact way that you got them on the same needle, or it can be confusing with a lot of gauges, and knitters won't know what to get. Also with things like ribbing at the collar or ribbing at the cuffs, There's going to be like a stretch factor, which of course always happens up in the neck, and things like that that will, be a little forgiving when it comes to, cuff and hem gauge or whatever. But it just can be confusing when there's a lot going on, and now I'm rambling.
You're not, but no, you've got the right point though. You provide the gauge information to the knitter that they need in order to swatch the main part of the pattern.
Yeah.
So if the majority of your garment design is in stockinette, then the gauge listed needs to be in stockinette. Or for instance, you can include trim gauges and things like that, but for the most part, a knitter may not use that for swatching purposes to determine their gauge and whether or not their needle size will match yours. So it's best to use to list gauge in the main stitch pattern. You're welcome, according to your style, to list all the gauges, but make sure that number one thing that you include is for the main stitch pattern. And some people like to include blocked and unblocked. This is iffy because your knitter may be substituting a different yarn. So definitely include blocked main stitch gauge primarily. If you choose to include additional gauges as an addendum or a help, then you can do that, but it may be extraneous information for the knitter. It's helpful.
It can cause confusion.
It can.
So she says, this is something that is helpful to me as a tech editor. It
Absolutely.
totally is. I mean,
yes.
As a tech editor and designer, you do have to know all the
what
gauges.
Are all your gauges.
Have to know, or it's not going to be right.
Right.
But it can really cause confusion for the knitter. They need to know the gauge that they need to get to make the thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, the unblocked gauge, a lot of people do offer both unblocked and blocked. And I don't know. I'm not a unblocked camp person, my personal, because
blocked is everything.
What's the point? Why do you need that? You
right.
know what I mean? If you're going to swatch something, the blocked and the unblocked, okay, say you get the same blocked gauge as the pattern. It doesn't necessarily mean that your unblocked gauge is going to be the same as the pattern.
That's right.
So,
especially if you did yarn substitution of any kind.
Yeah, I feel like that's just one more way to add confusion.
Right.
Have either of you seen a gauge listed with steam blocking? Oh, like specifically, like only block this way?
Mm-mm.
Do you mean that, Victoria?
Victoria.
There are sometimes patterns will specify how to block the thing. Lots of patterns I do nowadays give specific blocking instructions
right.
of how they want them to be done. And I suppose, although it's not very clear in the pattern, I don't know if every knitter would make that connection, but if you are suggesting that someone block something a specific way, it might be worth noting that these measurements were achieved with this type of blocking, or to take your gauge by blocking your swatch in this way. That makes sense. Designers can give additional info to their editor that isn't in the pattern. Yeah, you don't have
absolutely.
to put everything in there.
Yeah,
I mean, the same way that you wouldn't give them your notes or like your scratch charts or whatever, right?
Yeah, a lot of times you can offer information to your tech editor to help them speed their edit or even to clarify things that you may not give to your knitters, just because it might add confusion or add a layer of things that aren't important to their knitting the design. So blocked gauge, I've never seen it where it dictates what kind of blocking to do. And blocking is a broad definition.
It is. Well, and I think that's another thing where you can say in the pattern how like in your finishing instructions, how you think it should be blocked, and you say, soak in warm, whatever.
Right.
But not everybody's going to do that. Right. Just like not everybody's going to get gauge. Right?
Yeah, that's right. It really is up to the
give the
knitter.
Information that you think will give the best results to get the thing that you made, and then it's up to them if they're going to.
It's going to be up to the knitter to decide how they want to care for the finished piece and how they want to block the swatch in order to mimic how they're caring for the finished piece. I've had students who only dry clean their sweaters. I don't know how they afford it, but they only dry clean their sweaters. So their blocked gauge may be quite different, or their blocking is going to be different than something like I would, where I put mine in soap and water. So I would say you say how you made the design. In other words, you give instructions for how, if you were giving, sitting with someone and telling them how to complete your design, you can give them the instructions that they need. But really, it is in the knitter's camp as to how they block. And you don't have to dictate that if you don't feel like that's necessary. So, Christina, what kind of things are you think are essential to include in pattern instructions? And then
The
what
name of
kind
the
of
pattern. There's
the
the
name?
name of the pattern. You
You
have
mean
to
you just
include,
don't title it sweater?
you have to include all materials that are needed. And this
Mm-hmm.
is where you can either be really specific or you don't have to be, depending on
Right.
how much education or how much whatever you want to do, right?
Right.
But you need to list what needles they need. And you don't have to say the length, whatever, circular or double point. You can just say size 5 needles. That's
Right.
all you have to say, really. Or, and whatever. You need to say what type of yarn they need. And if you, again, don't want to specify anything, you at least need to give a weight of the yarn. And I would say at least the content of the yarn, like is it
Mm-hmm.
cotton, is it wool, is it acrylic, because it's going to make a difference in the finished thing. But if you don't want to go into any more detail than that, you could be like worsted weight wool, size 6 needles, whatever.
It is
And
helpful
then,
if you tell them how much.
yeah.
So if they need to
No, you have to
substitute,
tell, no, you have to tell how much. I
if they
just
want
mean
to,
if you don't want to list a specific name yarn, or if you don't
right,
want to list
exactly.
the exact content or whatever, you do have to say, 200 yards worsted weight wool, whatever they need.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to list an amount for every size. Like if you've got
Right.
all these sizes, you need to list an amount for every size. And to be off topic a little bit, you need to make sure that your yardages and meterages that you give for yarn amounts are correct. Right, for all the sizes, right? Not just the sample size.
Right.
You need to give all the notions they need if they're going to need stitch markers. And again,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to say what kind of stitch markers if you don't want to. You don't need to say that they need 12. You just need to say stitch markers. You need to say buttons. I think it's helpful to say how many buttons that you're going to need.
And
But
what
you can just say,
size?
and what, well, yes, you have to say what size buttons. See, you need to be here.
You mean it's not just about your list?
Buttons!
Well,
What kind of buttons?
here's the thing is how a lot of us are planners, especially as knitters. So we may want to buy buttons before we knit the thing, or we may want to go to our local yarn shop or place where we buy buttons and get a whole bunch of them to test them out. So we need to know how many up front. So
Yeah, know how many
in
buttons.
a sense, your notion list is almost like a shopping list. Your needle, a lot of people buy needles. Your knitters may buy needles specifically for that project. So this kind of upfront information in the introduction is really key because then they, especially if it's all on one page, they can print that out or open it up in their phone and take that while they shop online or at their local yarn store for the things that they need for that project. So make sure that it's complete and that
Yeah, so the
everything
bare
that you
bones,
mention in the
yeah.
product or in the design is in that list.
And that's where I think it is helpful. It's helpful to say what type of needle that you're going to need.
Right.
But like, that's not, you don't have to,
Right.
they're going to know.
Like you mean lengths?
Yeah. Like
Like
if you don't want to
cable
say,
lengths?
if someone's knitting a sock, they're going to know they can't do it or whatever, however it's written. Like you'll know from how the pattern's written what kind of needles you need. But like Sarah's saying, without having to read the whole pattern, if you say in the needles list needed what exact type of needles you need, then they don't have to go through the pattern to figure out what version of a size 5 something they need.
Right.
Always the more information you give, the more helpful it's going to be.
Especially if your project is modular or requires more than one set of needles, you need to make that up front. Like you need 2 sets of size 5 24-inch cable needles for a particular, like say you're doing a certain kind of join or they need that many. It can be a bummer if they didn't know that and then they get into that part of the project, and then they got to stop their project to go get the additional supplies. So,
And yeah, and that's why I think it is helpful to add like these
mhm.
extra information about the basic things, because you really don't
Yes.
need to do that, but the more information you give about each of these notions and needles and yarn is
Hmm.
very helpful. It's helpful information that they
Right.
don't have to figure out on their own. So that just sort of depends on what kind of pattern you like to write, what kind of
Hmm.
instructions you like to give. You have to include your gauge, which we talked about that, right, already.
Hmm.
You have to give the gauge that the knitter needs to get to make the thing.
And that's pretty
And
simple.
you need to make sure it's right.
Oh man, gauge. Gauge is everything in knitting.
This one I think is totally essential. I know people maybe won't agree with me, but you need to give sizing information and the finished measurements of the thing.
Hmm. And it shouldn't be a range.
Yeah.
It should be like a specific number. It shouldn't, sizing could be like it fits a certain range of body sizes, but the finished measurement should be a specific
No, no, no.
number.
The finished measurements are what they are and they're specific exact
Yeah,
numbers.
so that the knitter
You
can
know.
make the decision if they want to knit a different size because they prefer a different amount of ease or a
Yeah.
different
So
shape.
you need to list what the sizes are, as in what body sizes
Hmm.
the items are for, and what ease you intend. You know, and
Hmm.
maybe even lots of patterns lately, and I like this a lot. They'll give instructions on how to choose your size. So it
Oh
used
yeah,
to
I love
be,
that.
it used to be like, or another thing I really like about sizing and fit is if there are photographs, which is another thing that is not necessary. Okay, you don't need to have a picture, but it's awesome if you do, and knitters
Yes.
love pictures. Knitters love
Well,
pictures.
a lot
So
of
you don't have to
times
have a picture,
you
but
don't have to. That's
it'll
definitely
be really good to
optional.
have. Yeah, it's optional, but it's so good to have, and especially to have pictures, a couple, at least
Hmm.
the different ways of different angles, different ways of seeing things, different things that you might highlight that are specific or special about the item. But so some people will say how to choose a size. Some people will say in the photo, the model is wearing X size on
Yeah.
X size body, on X size head, on X size whatever. I find that
Hmm.
really helpful
To
because
give
then the knitter
to
gets
give a
an
bearing.
idea of,
Hmm.
okay, if I do this kind of ease that she suggests and this is the size of my head, it's going to look like this, you know?
And the thing about it is, patterns have changed a lot in the last 20 years. We include a lot more information
Mm.
because patterns are generally delivered in a digital form. So we're not so limited with space if like previous years when it would have been in a book or in a magazine, or even in like a paper form. So you might consider, as far as pictures go, maybe one or two pages at the end would be more descriptive pictures, close-ups of certain parts or the special parts that might be tricky for the knitter that they can use as a roadmap if they want it. If they need it, if they need a visual clue of how things are supposed to look as to see if they're on track. You don't have to include them, but definitely it adds value to your pattern.
Mm. Yes, it totally. Pictures are everything, right? I mean, we know
Hmm.
pictures are everything. But yeah, give sizing information and give the finished measurements. They're not the same thing.
And let us know what you guys think about all this information we're giving you. What kind of things do you find you need, you really like to give your knitters? And what kind of things do you have questions about? Like, should I be including this or not? So the next thing I think is detailed instructions are absolutely imperative. Your
Mm.
knitter needs to know everything that that they need in order to create your design. Um, you can give row by row instructions. You could give your instructions in storytelling form. There isn't one way to do it that is better than another as long as you're consistent in your style. But
There is
there's,
so much room for personality and style
yeah,
and
absolutely.
different ways of doing things in the instructions. I would like to say also, I think the instructions should be uninterrupted.
Yes.
Like I wouldn't put the instructions and then in the middle of them where it doesn't happen in that part of the instructions, have your chart or
Hmm.
have the schematic or have a picture. Like keep the instructions together. If you have charts and schematics, those should be included. But if the pattern can be worked just from the charts and you don't
Hmm.
really need the instructions if you're a chart knitter, then make sure the charts have instructions.
Yes.
So have a page of instructions for the charts, because there might be, you still need to cast on, you still need to have your border
Hmm.
stitches or whatever. So have a page for instructions for the charts if the thing can be worked just from charts. Um, yeah.
And it's okay to put the charts on a different page and then just
Yep.
refer to them in the instructions. And did we talk last week about, yeah, we talked last week about written and charted instructions.
Yes. Yep.
It's really your call as a designer for your design, what you include. Just make sure that everything is there and it's in a flow that's sequential in the way that it's worked. Don't make the knitter go back and forth, flip pages, like, oh, work section 1 and then work section 3 over on page 5. Make sure that the knitter can just sit there and work straight through the pattern sequentially. I think that's important as far as instructions are concerned.
Flow.
Flow is really important, so that they don't end up, if you have them jumping places in different parts of the pattern, they may accidentally skip a section and then get frustrated. So think about the usability of your pattern in that form. The other thing I wanted to mention as far as instructions while we're here is accessibility. If you have, I don't know how to put this in a way that doesn't come across incorrectly. Consider accessibility for your patterns. So there is a lot of resources online to there is a low accessibility or a low vision group on Ravelry. If you can't access Ravelry right now because of their accessibility issues, I would definitely reach out to some in the community who focus on accessible patterns. So what this means is your instructions may not need to be broken up into columns. They may need to be in paragraph form. There are other things that you can do as far as fonts and types and making things not images but actual text in your digital document. So put it in the back of your mind as part of your growth as a designer to look into making your patterns accessible, even if you would have a separate download file for low vision or for other accessibility
Right.
issues. So it's just something I'm throwing out there that this should be part of your growth and your learning is to achieve this in your brand if it's important to you, which I think it should be. We're opinionated tech editors. I think it's definitely something to keep on the front burner. The next thing you have is notes on your list. Is that what you have?
Notes. And notes I don't have as a necessary.
Notes are optional.
No, notes are optional. And notes, the one thing I would say about notes is be sure that they are in front of before when the knitter needs the note.
Mm-hmm.
Don't write
Right,
your whole
after.
body of instructions or this section and at the end say, when working this section, XYZ. That
Right.
goes ahead of that.
Right.
The same way, like, this came up in a proof I did this morning, but the cast on. So, cast on 24 stitches with X yarn and this cast on. I know it sounds stupid because who wouldn't finish the sentence, but I'm telling you, someone's going to cast on those 24 stitches with some other cast on, and some other thing, not what you said.
Mm-hmm.
With X needles and X yarn using X cast on 24 stitches.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
So in other words, give the knitter everything up front.
Yes, give them the information they need with notes, with instructions, with everything before
Mm-hmm.
they get to the part where they have to do it.
So
Because If you don't, it's going to be done, and they won't have done the thing.
And then they'll be
Right.
like, I didn't see
Oh,
that
I didn't
note.
see that. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some designers actually in their pattern layout underneath the header, the section header. So like let's say it's brim. They'll have a part where it says notes under each section just to kind of give the knitter the important information up front before working the instructions. So that's another way that you can think about formatting your pattern.
And not everything, like, there's not notes for everything. You
Right.
don't need a note for everything. But there are some things that are trickier, specific, or some way that you
Mm-hmm.
found can be helpful to know, something that your testers found or you found that was helpful
Mm-hmm.
to know for this particular part or whatever. And you can
Right.
put those notes, like Sarah said, at the beginning of the section it'll be needed, or you can put all the notes in the beginning of the pattern before you even get to the instructions.
Right.
As long as they're ahead of the work,
Yes.
you know.
So do you think abbreviation should be ahead or behind?
I think it doesn't matter.
Good.
I
Me
think it
too.
doesn't matter as long as they're
They
together
can
in a
find
place,
them. Mm-hmm.
like an index or table of contents, whatever. Look in the front or the back, whatever, as long as they're all together and they're all included. And not everybody includes all the abbreviations. So some people don't include things like knit, purl, stitches, repeat, da da da.
Really?
Some people, because they're basic or,
Yeah,
right?
but
So some people don't
really?
even put those in. Not a lot of people, but I'm saying, like, and if you think back to, and maybe it's just because I'm basic and old, but
You are
like,
not old.
patterns did not always have these big
Right.
old abbreviation lists.
That's
So I
true.
think if you're coming off of that thinking, there may be some things you leave out, but almost it's not often, like almost everything now, every single abbreviation used in the pattern is in the
I
abbreviation
personally
list.
think you need to list all the abbreviations
Yeah.
because I remember when I was a beginning knitter and I didn't know what K is.
No, I think you
Maybe
do too, and I will do
what
that.
is
Like,
K1? Oh yeah, I got to remind myself that means knit.
and when we tech edit patterns, we do that. So we go
Right.
through the whole pattern and make sure that every single abbreviation used, even if it's like, a word, like approximately, and you write approx. Well, that goes
Hmm.
in the abbreviation list.
Sure.
Even if it's some people, and not everybody does this one, but some people even will put, like if you use parentheses to indicate a repeat, some people will
Some
put that in
people
the abbreviation list that parentheses indicate a repeat. Now, not everybody does that, but
you
sometimes that's in there
could
too.
consider it. It might help the knitters who have no idea what is your
Right.
particular form of repeat style.
So
So
I
create.
personally think, and Sarah does too, that every single abbreviation that you use anywhere in the pattern, especially in the instructions, like, so not everybody, for example, will put DPNs in their abbreviation list.
Mhm.
But then if you talk about DPNs, so this is my kind of rule of thumb on that. So not everybody will put DPNs in the abbreviation list, but if DPNs is used in the
Mhm.
body of the pattern, then it needs to go in the abbreviation list. Like if you
Right.
refer to that, if you like I did a pattern last week that was like the instructions were, knit 4, knit 2 together on each of 4 DPNs or
Mhm.
whatever. Like that was in the instructions. Then
Mhm.
the DPNs need to be in the abbreviation list.
So Creative Me DK says it's so annoying when some are missing. I totally agree with you.
And now abbreviations that you have to include are all. I think we talked about this. If it was, I don't know if I think maybe it was last week with chart keys. I forget. But
Yeah,
there
with
are
chart
lots of
keys.
abbreviations like cable stitches and decreases
Mhm.
and, or it was another one we talked about it too. But there's lots of stitches out there and decreases and
That
all
may need
kinds of
more
things
instruction.
that are abbreviated different ways by different people
Right.
and that are done different ways by different people.
Yes.
Not everybody does it all the same.
That's
Whether there's
correct.
a right way or wrong way or should or whatever, there's like 100 different ways that people work slip, slip, knit. It's not the same. So if you don't care how they work it, as long as they decrease by 1, then you can just write slip, slip, knit. But if it's going to make a difference in how it looks, and that's important to your design, how they work that stitch, define it.
Mhm.
Not everybody
So
works these complicated things the same way, and not everybody abbreviates them the same way.
So thoughts on including abbreviations for terms not specific to knitting, such as meter, centimeter, yards, ounce, etc.
Oh, I don't know. So that is totally in the
That's
pattern, and I think
style.
that's where I go to if it's not in the instructions, I don't worry about it, because you're right, Joan, that is totally in all those abbreviations are used, in the
in the greater
information
world.
section, but they're
And
not really like
yeah,
knitting abbreviations, right? And I think
those are
that's what she's
almost
saying.
standard abbreviations. So I think
Like in the world.
we learn in late elementary school what centimeters, S or cm means.
Right.
So things that are standardized throughout the world that are used in other applications, I wouldn't necessarily think that's necessary to put into an abbreviations list.
Yeah, I don't. But then I think about, but then some people
Some people
abbreviate
do.
them all differently, right? Like I've seen
Hmm.
so many different abbreviations for yards.
Or years or months, like if you're doing a 3 to 6 month pattern, like a child size pattern, you may need to indicate what those actually mean.
So I've never done, yeah, I've never put those in the abbreviation list, those kinds of, just the knitting terms I have.
The
What do
one
you
thing,
think, Joan? What do you do? Do you do
yeah,
that?
tell us if you include it, if you find it's important or that people ask and
Yeah, has anyone
want it
ever,
to be clarified.
yeah. I've never
So,
had that come up with anyone.
do you guys abbreviate your abbreviations table? Do you abbreviate? Do you alphabetize? I can't, my words are sleepy.
Oh, well, how the list is organized is very subjective.
It is your style.
Oh my goodness.
So do you put
So
them in
people,
alpha order or not?
me or
Yeah,
people?
no,
Are
I
you
mean,
asking people?
yeah, I'm asking the people who are watching us.
Oh, so Joan said it depends on who she's editing for.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, so you've had people want to do that. It's all about
Mm-hmm.
accessibility and making patterns user friendly, regardless of personal
Yes.
knowledge. Assuming someone else has that knowledge too is privilege. That's exactly what we're saying. So, all these things you don't have to do, but
Right.
the more information that you put in your pattern is that many more people that you're making your pattern accessible to. It's the same reason that we put as many sizes as we can and as
Mm-hmm.
much information as we can, and the same reason you would include tutorials.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you might even do your own tutorial, or you would have pictures. Lots of people will include pictures or drawings in the pattern of how to do a specific thing if it's complicated.
Right.
But all these things you do, sizes, resources, lists of things, notions, what kind of needles, instructions, notes. The more information that you give, the more people can access your pattern. And that's
And
the whole point. I mean, what is a pattern
yeah,
if people can't knit
the
it?
whole point of this is for people to be able to use your pattern with ease,
Yeah,
with
so Anita says that she
just
lists them in the order they show up in the pattern. And
which
that,
is fine, I think, for
oh,
a
we got
shorter
a vote
list.
for alphabetizing.
Yeah, lots
And
of
yeah, making your
alphabetizing.
patterns accessible is like the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we got lots of alphabetizing votes. I've seen it
Mm-hmm.
tons of different ways. It's always some other way. I never correct it because people do it the way they want to do it.
I personally think if you're going to have a short list, it's okay to put them in the order that they show up. But if you've got like 36 abbreviations, it's easier to find them as a knitter if they're alphabetized or if they're
Yeah,
put
when
in
there's a lot
sections.
of them. When there's a
Yeah.
lot of them, I agree. I'm not a designer, but this is helping so much on how to read patterns with caution and not rush in.
Oh,
Maybe read
yeah.
carefully whilst knitting gauge swatch.
Yes.
I
We
mean,
all want to
just like a
jump in
recipe, right?
fast.
Like when you're cooking,
Mm-hmm.
it's really good to read the whole recipe because you might get in
Yes.
it and think you have time or think you have everything you need or think that you got the right pan or whatever.
Right.
And you're halfway through it and you're like, oh, I can't do it because I don't have it. So if you read the whole pattern first, then you know what you're getting into. But
What
one more
just,
thing, any
what
pattern could
just,
potentially be someone's first. That is so true
and
because really,
that's
if
the
you
way you
have
should approach it.
I agree. If you have the instructions and you know how to knit and purl, you can knit anything. It's just
Yes.
following directions,
Yes.
right? The same way you make a recipe.
And knitting patterns used to be called receipts or recipes. That's what they used
I
to
do
be.
that all the time. I'm always
What?
like, oh, I just printed up this new recipe. My husband like has no idea if I'm going to cook it or knit it. He's like, and also with abbreviations, though, you also don't have to abbreviate. You don't want to.
No, you
You
don't.
don't have to abbreviate anything.
That's right.
You don't have to. I mean, you might want to abbreviate things that take up a lot of words. Like you might not want to write out, back to my example, slip, slip, knit. It's easier to write SSK. But if you want to write out knit, purl, repeat, like
Yes.
everything, you don't have
Feel
to
free.
abbreviate.
It's your
You don't
pattern.
have to abbreviate stitches.
Hmm.
You can, you don't have to.
I want to come back to what Just Make said. Any pattern could potentially be someone's first. This is where it's very helpful if you use testers to get this kind of feedback. Ask your testers what part of the pattern was not clear. What could I have written to make it more accessible, to make it easier to understand and to work from? And it's helpful if you are using a pattern that can be used by first time or beginner knitters, that you curate some testers who are beginner knitters, because they will see things you and I would never see because we're a more
Right.
advanced knitter.
Right.
So the other thing you mentioned is your contact information. I think this is important. You need to let the knitters know how to get a hold of you if they have a problem. There's any number of ways that you can provide a way for people to
Get
contact you
pattern support.
or get pattern support. But as part of your design business, it's very important that you set up a way for knitters to have customer support with you. Hopefully you won't have a lot if you use a tech editor.
It's also a
But
good place to put any place that you want them to share your pattern, or if you have a Ravelry, any other way to reach you, or any other place they can share share what they made, share their pattern if you want them to, or invite them to do that. It's a place you can talk a little bit about yourself if you want to. Not everybody likes to do that, but you can, and that's a good place to do it when you put your contact info. What Jess Makes said something about what we were talking about. I have found sometimes in testing that designers don't enjoy that feedback.
I want to talk about this. Designers may not like it because they take it as a form of criticism rather than as a way to improve. So that doesn't say anything about the tester. That says something about the attitude of the designer. It's uncomfortable to get feedback.
It is.
It's really uncomfortable, and we as editors totally understand that. It's uncomfortable to get your edits back from your tech editor.
Dude, this job is so hard.
It hurts because nobody's perfect. We all can improve. Even if you receive feedback from a tester or from your tech editor about something that, hey, this just doesn't work, or this is a problem after you've spent gobs of hours trying
It's
to
your
make it
baby.
work.
This design is your baby, and someone's like put 2,100 markups on it, and circles
It's hard.
and lines and highlights, and your testers
And
are like,
man,
"Oh, well, I didn't
I
understand
got to work
this."
that section again.
Yeah, I mean it's overwhelming, but I
Yes.
think it's necessary though. Feedback.
It's necessary.
If your goal is to make a pattern that knitters
that works,
will have success with.
When you publish a pattern, do you want to have that feedback after you've published the pattern?
Right.
I don't. I want to have that kind of feedback before, so I can problem solve before people have purchased my product, because this affects my reputation as a designer. This will affect my future pattern releases. So yes, it's super uncomfortable to receive negative feedback or even critical feedback, but it depends on how you take it. Do I take this as a personal attack against me, or do I take this with a huge grain of salt and start problem solving? How can I make this better? How can I take what they say, and is it something I need to listen to? Is it something I don't need to listen to? So
well, and because tech editing and testing are really tools, right?
They're tools to make it better.
That you can use to your advantage to make your pattern the best it can be for your knitter.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's good. That's only going to be good.
It's only good in the long run.
And you don't have to incorporate all the feedback. Just like lots of edits I send out, they don't correct everything I know.
No, we call it steading. If the designer goes, nope, I'm doing what I want.
What do we call it?
Stet. S-T-E-T. They stet it. They say, nope, it stays as it is.
Yeah, not everybody likes the suggestions that we make, and not everybody's going to like the tester feedback they get. But that's, like Sarah said originally, that's on them. I don't think that feedback shouldn't be given, because they're employing you as a tester or a tech editor to help them with those things. That's what you're supposed to be doing, is giving feedback like that.
So what Just Make says,
pride to the side in the service of the bigger picture, a comprehensible and beautiful pattern? Do you only get designs when they are done and ready to publish, or part way if one runs into problems? And yes, I agree what Jess makes, what she said. You really
Mm-hmm.
do need to set your pride aside and think about what it is you're actually creating, what you're
What's
doing.
your goal?
Yeah, like why are you doing it if you don't want it to be accessible to knitters and to be
Or
easily knit from?
or to be awesome and to be
Yeah.
great out of the box without having to publish errata afterwards.
Oof.
Yeah, it's
Which always
uncomfortable.
happens. I mean, that happens all the time.
So
So
we
if
really
you
need
know that's
to,
going to happen anyway,
yes.
then definitely the things you know about ahead of time
Mm-hmm.
make as good as you can, you know?
So to answer Creative Me DK's question, I get patterns usually that are through the design process, not necessarily in layout, but ready for testing. And the designer will send it to me to iron out any technical details before it gets into the tester's hands. That's generally what comes across my desk. I don't personally, as a tech editor, I don't like to work when things half done, but
Yeah.
some tech editors love that. So if you are someone who likes to work on one section and send that off and then work on the next section and then send that off, there are tech editors who do work that way and thrive working with designers that
I
way.
had I have a couple times with a designer done where they didn't have it finished. And so I just did what they had done so far, and there was still like parts
Mm-hmm.
that weren't finished. And it's not my favorite, I think, because for
Yeah,
me, I feel like everything's happening at the same time in a pattern. Everything's
right,
related. Everything has to do with everything else. And also, I don't want to, I think it needs to, I prefer to do the whole thing.
right,
And also so that it's all fresh in my mind at the same time. So I know exactly what's going on over here. So I know what has to go on over here. But I
right.
have gotten things part way done, but not very often. Like I could name on one hand number of times.
I think you have one more thing on your list, Christina. What's our time looking like? I want to make sure we don't go over.
Oh, it's 1:45, Sarah. Quarter of.
So let's wrap this up. Do you guys have any questions for us about this topic of what to include in your pattern? In other words, what sections or items that will help the knitter better?
The last thing is the copyright statement. And about
Copyright.
that, I would just say absolutely 100% make sure it's on the pattern.
Yes.
And also check the date.
Mm-hmm. It should match the year that it's
My
published.
daughter is like out there. Stop.
I left my dog inside, so there's no toddler bothering me here.
Yeah, make
Yeah.
sure the date is right. So many times, like you'll get a pattern in
Yes.
the beginning of a new year and it's wrong. So check the date.
And
And that
you
and
might
that's
want to
something.
include a version too, a version number if you make a lot of changes to your pattern because of
Mhm.
maybe you wanted to improve it after publication, maybe you added some new things to it or you corrected
Or
an
if you did
error.
have problems found after,
Mm-hmm.
if you did have problems found after it was released, you might want you want to record that and know which version it is that your knitter is getting. And an easy way to
Yeah.
check that is they can look at the bottom of the page and see version 2, and you would know for yourself.
Yes. And you would
And I
know.
think the only thing we didn't really talk about is where in the body of the pattern to include all of these things. And I think we did a little though. I mean, everything you need to know ahead of time put up front.
You
The
could.
instructions should be all together.
Charts should be together
Charts should be
unless it's
together, and
crucial
unless
that they be in the middle of the instructions.
right. And maybe even have their own instructions if that's necessary. And the copyright info and contact info and all that kind of stuff and the abbreviations can go wherever they fit, you know,
Mm-hmm.
wherever you want them. But I would not put them, just don't put anything in the middle of the instructions.
It does help the knitter to have all the instructions in one chunk.
And that flows.
It flows.
That is
Now, of
not,
course, these are all our opinions, having seen a whole lot of patterns, hundreds of them. This is what we think works and works well for knitters. You can totally discard our advice. You can do whatever you want because it's your pattern and your style. Just take into consideration that you do get some feedback from actual knitters before proceeding to publish your pattern, just to make sure that things are working the way that they should, and the knitters can make your design. So,
Well,
Christina,
I think that's really important. Like you don't have to do
yeah,
anything that you don't
no, you
agree with
don't.
or like or want to do. It's, you're the author, the creator, and it's
Mm-hmm.
what you want. But what, like, I think you do need to think about what your goal is with it. What are you trying to
Yes.
communicate? What do you want your thing to be?
Mm-hmm.
And so there may be ways that you want to be accessible, but that don't fit in with having a lot of information in your pattern. So how can you make
Right.
that work in a different way? It
Exactly.
doesn't, not including lots of things, or not doing it all the ways that we or your tech editor might suggest or your testers do, doesn't mean you don't have or that doesn't mean there might not be another way
Mm-hmm.
for you to do it that could work and still give you the goal you're after for
Right.
what you're doing.
So, Christina, do you have this blog post up on your blog now?
Yes, if you go to the link in my Instagram bio, you can click. It's the top
Ooh.
link.
So if you guys want this as a written list that you can kind of check off as you're working through your pattern, go to
No,
christinamama.blogspot.com.
it's
Oh,
on
it's
the link is on Instagram, so you
it's
can just go to my profile and
go
click
to
it.
her profile after we log off, and she has it on her link tree so that you can get in her profile. Just click on that link, and you'll be able to go find this information that we talked about today. So hopefully that's helpful to you guys.
I hope it's
Um,
helpful.
yeah, let us know if you guys have any questions this coming week. You can always shoot us a DM, ask us questions about things that you would like us to cover. We not sure what we're going to talk about next week. If you guys have some suggestions, we'd love to hear them.
We talked about doing a recap of the 4Cs since that
Oh,
wasn't
that's
recorded.
right. So when we first started doing these tech tip talks, I didn't have my technical stuff together, and I didn't record some of our first talks. And we'd like to recap some of the things that we covered in those sessions, just so that they're actually there for people to find later. So I think we will cover the 4 C's, which the letter C, the 4 C's that tech editors look for when we are editing patterns. So we'll touch those things next week. We'll see you next Monday
Oh,
at
yes,
this.
please. Amy
Oh,
says yes,
awesome,
please.
Amy.
And we
I'm
may do
glad
a
you're
recap
here.
on Gauge also. We may
Oh, yeah.
do a
I
recap on
don't,
Gauge.
that's a lot to talk about again. We might make a separate session for that
Oh, I
one.
didn't mean at the same time.
Oh,
No,
good.
like a separate recap.
My lips are
Like
tired from
like a
talking about
separate one, a
everything.
redo, separate, not at the same time.
Hey, Trudy, it was good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Um, we'll see you guys at this new time. We're going to meet at 11 Central, 12 Eastern, which is noon. It's just a better time for us, generally speaking. We'll see you next Monday. I hope you guys have a great, safe, healthy, productive week.
Thanks, you guys.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.